The minister had just asked if anyone objected. Jonathan Ashford raised his own hand. 200 guests stopped breathing inside the Plaza's grand ballroom in Manhattan. His bride turned white. Jonathan wasn't looking at her. He was looking past the silk drapes, past the crystal chandeliers, past every powerful face in that room, straight at the woman standing in the back corner holding a tray of water glasses. His fingers closed around the silver pocket watch in his jacket, the one his dead mother had pressed into his palm 3 years ago, and he said 7 words that shattered the most expensive wedding of the year. "Elena, come here. Tell them everything." The maid didn't move. The bride didn't breathe. And what came next would destroy every lie that ballroom had been built to celebrate. Before we begin, drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story reaches. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. We do this every single week. And listen, when that billionaire stops his own wedding and calls the maid forward, what comes out of her mouth will destroy you. Let's dive in. 6 months before that altar, Jonathan Ashford sat alone in the penthouse on the 42nd floor of a building he owned on Park Avenue. The city glittered below him like a jewelry box someone had kicked open. 12 hotels across 3 states. A name that opened doors before he even knocked. A dining table built for 14 where only 1 chair ever moved. He hadn't changed anything since his mother died. Her reading glasses still sat on the side table by the window. Her lavender perfume had long faded from the cushions, but he swore some mornings he could still catch it drifting through the hallway like a ghost that refused to leave. Diane Ashford had been the only person in Jonathan's life who told him the truth without packaging it. She had built the first hotel with her own savings while raising him alone. She taught him how to read a contract and how to read a person. And when the cancer came, she sat him down in this same living room, placed the silver pocket watch in his hand, the one her own mother had carried from Argentina, and said, "Mijo, this watch doesn't tell time. It tells you who stayed." He never understood what she meant. He carried it anyway. Elena Vasquez had already been working in the penthouse for a year when Diane passed. She was there the morning the ambulance came. She was there when Jonathan sat in the kitchen at 4 in the morning staring at a cold cup of coffee. She didn't speak. She didn't offer words. She simply replaced the cold coffee with a warm one, set it exactly where his hand could reach without stretching, and disappeared back into the hallway. That was Elena, present without pressing, invisible without being absent. 3 months after the funeral, Marcus Webb showed up at the penthouse with a bottle of scotch and a woman on his arm. "Jonathan, you've been rotting in this place long enough," Marcus said, dropping into the leather chair like he owned it. "Meet Victoria Langford. She runs the Langford Gallery downtown. Brilliant woman. I told her you needed some life in this apartment, and she's the one who can bring it." Victoria smiled. It was a careful smile, practiced, symmetrical, warm in all the right places. She wore a black dress that fit like it had been stitched onto her body. Her perfume arrived before she did. She extended her hand and said, "I'm sorry about your mother, Jonathan. Marcus told me she was extraordinary." Jonathan shook her hand. Something behind her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. Something calculating, something measuring, but grief makes a man blind to the things he doesn't want to see. He invited her to sit. She chose Diane's chair. Elena, carrying fresh towels down the hallway, paused for one breath at the edge of the living room. She looked at the woman sitting in the dead woman's chair, and something cold moved through her chest. She said nothing. She kept walking. But she remembered. Elena Vasquez woke every morning at 4:30 in a 1-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights where the radiator clanked like someone was trapped inside it. The kitchen was small enough that she could stand in the center, touch the stove with one hand and the refrigerator with the other. A 7-year-old girl named Sophia slept on the pull-out couch in the living room, surrounded by stuffed animals that Elena bought one at a time from the dollar store on 181st Street whenever she had $3 left at the end of the week. Sophia was her sister's daughter. Carmen had died 2 years ago, a blood clot that came without warning on a Tuesday afternoon while she was folding laundry. She was 31. Elena got the call while she was polishing the marble countertops in Jonathan's kitchen. She finished the countertop, put the cloth down, walked to the service bathroom, closed the door, and pressed her face into a towel so nobody would hear her scream. She went back to work 11 minutes later because the rent was due in 4 days and a dead sister doesn't pause the world for the living. Abuela Rosa, their grandmother, lived 6 blocks away in a 5th-floor walk-up with no elevator. 83 years old, bad knees, a voice like warm bread, and hands that had cleaned houses across Manhattan for 40 years before Elena took over the family trade. Every Sunday, Elena brought Sophia to Abuela Rosa's apartment, and the 3 of them ate rice and beans at a table so small their elbows touched. Those Sunday meals were the only hours in the week when Elena's shoulders came down from her ears. At the penthouse, Elena existed in margins. She arrived before Jonathan woke and left after he retired to his study. She knew which floorboards creaked, which cabinet doors stuck, which hallway carried sound from the master bedroom to the kitchen. She knew things about that apartment that Jonathan himself had forgotten, where Diane had hidden birthday cards inside old books, where the plumbing groaned at midnight, where the morning light hit the silver pocket watch on the nightstand and scattered tiny circles across the ceiling like coins thrown from heaven. She knew all of this because invisible women learn the architecture of silence. It was a Thursday evening, for months before the wedding, when Elena heard something she was never meant to hear. She was replacing the liner in the guest bathroom wastebasket. Victoria had started sleeping over most weekends by then, when Victoria's voice floated through the closed bedroom door. Not loud, not careless, just confident enough to forget that walls in old buildings are thinner than rich people think. I know, baby. I miss them too. Kiss the kids for me. I'll be home Saturday before Marcus calls about the next step. Elena's hands stopped moving. The wastebasket liner dangled from her fingers. She replayed the words once, twice, 3 times inside her head. Baby. The kids. Home. Saturday. Marcus. She told herself she had misheard. She tied the liner, carried it out, and did not look back at that bedroom door. But her hands didn't stop trembling until she reached Washington Heights that night. Elena spent the next 2 weeks convincing herself that the phone call meant nothing. People say baby to friends. People say kids when talking about nephews. People mention names that could belong to anyone. She swept the penthouse floors every morning and told her reflection in the bathroom mirror that it was not her business. Not her world. Not her place. Then the boarding pass appeared. Victoria had left her coat draped over the arm of the hallway chair. A cream-colored cashmere thing that cost more than Elena's rent for 3 months. Elena picked it up to hang it properly in the closet. A slip of paper fell from the inside pocket and landed face up on the hardwood. Philadelphia. Round trip. Dated 2 Saturdays ago. Elena stared at it. She picked it up, turned it over. Victoria Langford. Seat 3A. She slid it back into the pocket and hung the coat without breathing. Philadelphia. Every other weekend. Baby. The kids. The second piece came 10 days later during a dinner party Jonathan hosted for a group of investors. Elena moved through the dining room refilling water glasses, clearing appetizer plates, existing in the background the way furniture exists. Present, functional, unnoticed. Victoria sat at the head of the table opposite Jonathan, laughing, charming, placing her hand on his arm at exactly the right moments. Her clutch purse sat on the side table behind her chair. When Elena reached for an empty glass near the purse, the clasp popped open. A folded piece of paper slipped out and drifted to the floor like a leaf. Elena bent to retrieve it. She unfolded it without thinking, the instinct of someone trained to pick up and organize every stray object in a room. It was a crayon drawing. A house with 4 stick figures standing in front. Too tall, too small. Across the top, in the shaky handwriting of a child no older than 5 or 6, were the words, "Mommy come home soon. Love, Lily." Elena's blood went cold. She folded the drawing, slipped it back into the purse, and closed the clasp with fingers that had turned to ice. She finished the dinner service without dropping a single glass. She smiled when spoken to. She cleared the dessert plates, wiped the counters, folded the napkins, hung her apron, and walked to the service elevator. Inside the elevator, alone, she pressed her back against the wall and covered her mouth with both hands. Mommy come home soon. This was not a misheard phone call. This was not a boarding pass that could be explained away. This was a child's drawing. A child who had a mother named Victoria who left and came back, every other weekend, to a house in Philadelphia where a family was waiting. But what Elena discovered next made the boarding passes and the crayon drawing look like nothing at all. 2 weeks before the wedding, Victoria insisted that all household staff attend the rehearsal gala at the Plaza to serve during the cocktail hour. Jonathan agreed without thinking. It was a reasonable request from a bride managing her own event. Elena ironed her black service uniform, tied her hair back tight, and took the subway downtown with a knot in her stomach that had nothing to do with the job. The Plaza's grand ballroom was a world built for people who never questioned whether they belonged. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with gold leaf. Waiters in white jackets carried champagne on silver trays. Women wore gowns that caught the light like liquid metal. Men in tailored suits laughed with their mouths open and their wallets closed. The air smelled like orchids and old money, two things that could fill a room without making a single sound. Elena moved through it all carrying a tray of sparkling water. She kept her eyes forward, her posture straight, her hands steady. She had learned long ago that the safest way to cross a room full of powerful people was to become the tray, not the person holding it. Victoria found her near the dessert table. She approached from the left, holding a glass of red wine, smiling at a circle of guests who watched her like she was a painting they wanted to buy. She turned, and her elbow caught Elena's tray at a sharp angle. 3 glasses of water crashed to the marble floor. The sound cut through the music like a slap. "Oh my God!" Victoria gasped, pressing her free hand to her chest. "Elena, sweetheart, you have to be more careful. These floors are Italian marble. They stain." Every face within 20 feet turned toward them. Elena knelt immediately, picking up the shattered glass with her bare hands. A shard nicked her thumb. A thin line of blood ran across her palm. Victoria leaned down, not to help, but to whisper. Her smile stayed perfectly in place for the audience. "Clean it up fast, Elena. This isn't Washington Heights. People here notice stains." Elena didn't look up. She placed every shard onto the tray, wiped the floor with the cloth from her apron, and stood. Her thumb was bleeding. She pressed it into the inside of her palm and held the tray steady. "It's clean, ma'am," she said. Her voice carried no anger, no hurt, no tremble, just fact. If this story has you hooked, tap that like button. It helps more people find stories that truly matter. Jonathan arrived at the dessert table 40 seconds later. He saw the wet floor, the broken glass on Elena's tray, the faintest red smudge on her apron. He looked at Victoria. He looked at Elena. "What happened here?" "Nothing, my love," Victoria said, threading her arm through his. "Just a small accident." She handled it beautifully. "Didn't you, Elena?" Elena nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." She turned and walked toward the service corridor, her back straight, her bleeding hand hidden behind the tray. Jonathan watched her leave. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not suspicion yet, not understanding, just the faintest crack in the glass wall that separates the people who sit at tables from the people who clear them. Victoria followed Elena into the service corridor. The noise of the gala faded behind the swinging door like someone had pressed mute on a television. The corridor was narrow, lit by a single fluorescent tube that buzzed and flickered. It smelled like industrial soap and damp mops. This was the part of the plaza that the guests never saw. The bones behind the beauty, the engine room where people like Elena lived and breathed while people like Victoria danced on the floor above. Elena was standing at the utility sink, running cold water over her cut thumb when she heard the heels. Sharp, deliberate, unhurried. The rhythm of a woman who had come to deliver a message, not to have a conversation. "Turn around." Elena turned off the faucet, dried her hands on the cloth tucked into her apron, turned slowly. Victoria stood 3 feet away with her arms crossed and the wine glass still in her right hand. The smile was gone. The mask she wore for Jonathan, for the guests, for the cameras. All of it had been folded up and put away. What remained was something Elena had seen in glimpses for months but never at full volume. Cold, focused, transactional. "I know you've been watching me," Victoria said. I see the way you look at me when you think nobody's paying attention. Those little pauses in the hallway. That expression you make when I kiss Jonathan goodnight. You think you're invisible, Elena, but I see invisible women. I've been stepping over them my whole life. Elena said nothing. She pressed the damp cloth against her thumb and held it there. So let me make this very simple for you. Victoria took one step closer. Her perfume invaded the corridor. Something floral, something expensive, something designed to make other women feel small. In 12 days, I become Victoria Ashford. That means this penthouse, this staff, this life. All of it runs through me. One word from me and you lose your job. One phone call and I make sure no agency in Manhattan touches your file again. She paused, tilted her head. Let the silence do the work. And that little niece of yours, Sophia, right? Sweet girl. Must be hard raising her alone on a housekeeper's salary. Must be hard keeping that grandmother of yours in her apartment with the rent going up every year in Washington Heights. It would be such a shame if things got harder. The fluorescent light buzzed. A drop of water fell from the faucet into the steel basin. Elena felt her heartbeat in her ears, in her throat, in the cut on her thumb. Every instinct told her to look down, to nod, to survive the way she had always survived, by becoming smaller. She didn't. She looked Victoria directly in the eyes and said one sentence. Quiet, level, without a single crack in her voice. You can take my job, ma'am, but you cannot take what I know. Victoria blinked. Her lips parted. For half a second, less than half, something moved behind her eyes that looked exactly like fear. She recovered fast, turned on her heel, and pushed through the swinging door without another word. But her hand, the one holding the wine glass, was shaking. 3 days after the gala, Elena found the last piece. The piece that connected everything. Jonathan had left for a breakfast meeting downtown. Victoria was in Philadelphia. Another weekend trip she explained away as a gallery exhibition in Boston. The penthouse was empty except for Elena and the silence that lived inside its walls like a permanent tenant. She was dusting the study, Jonathan's private room, the one with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and his mother's reading glasses still resting on the side table, when she noticed the briefcase. It was not Jonathan's. It was Marcus Webb's. Brown leather, brass buckles, monogrammed in gold on the front flap. M.W. He had been over the night before for drinks with Jonathan, planning the final details of the wedding reception. He must have forgotten it. The briefcase was open. Not halfway, not carelessly. Fully open, flap folded back, as if Marcus had been reviewing something and left in a rush. Elena would have closed it and set it aside. She would have done what she always did. Touched nothing that didn't belong to her. Seen nothing that wasn't meant for her eyes. But a name stopped her cold. On the top page of a stack of documents sitting inside the briefcase, printed in bold legal font, was a name she recognized. Not Victoria Langford, Victoria Myers. And beneath it, a second name, Kevin Myers, spouse. Elena's breath left her body. She didn't touch the documents. She stood over that briefcase and read what she could see without moving a single page. Her eyes scanned fast, the way a woman reads when she knows she might never get another chance. It was a property transfer agreement. A house in Chestnut Hill, Philadelphia. Purchased 18 months ago. Joint ownership, Victoria Myers and Kevin Myers. The buying agent listed on the document was a company called Webb Capital Holdings. Marcus's company. Elena kept reading. Beneath the property agreement was a second document. An invoice from the Langford Gallery billed to the Ashford Estate Trust. 7 paintings purchased over the last 14 months. Total value, $4.2 million. Each painting bought at 3 times its appraised market value. The receiving account for every transaction was routed through Webb Capital Holdings. Elena stepped back from the briefcase. Her knees felt like water. The picture assembled itself inside her mind with a clarity that made her sick. Victoria was married. She had a husband named Kevin and 2 children in Philadelphia. Marcus had introduced her to Jonathan deliberately. The gallery, the paintings, the inflated invoices, it was a pipeline. Money flowing out of Jonathan's estate, through Victoria's gallery, into Marcus's company, and back to the family Jonathan didn't know existed. His best friend and his bride were robbing him in broad daylight, and they were using his loneliness as the front door. Elena closed the briefcase. She latched both buckles. She set it exactly where she found it, angled the same way, flap facing the same direction. She picked up her dusting cloth and finished the study. Her hands were steady. Her mind was on fire. That Sunday, Elena took Sophia to Abuela Rosa's apartment the way she always did. They climbed the 5 flights because the elevator had been broken since before Sophia was born. The stairwell smelled like rice from someone's kitchen on the 3rd floor and pine sol from the hallway mopping that never quite dried. Sophia ran ahead, her sneakers slapping each step, counting them out loud the way Abuela Rosa had taught her. 1 for every year God gives you, mija, so you better count them all. Abuela Rosa was waiting at the door in her housecoat and slippers, a wooden spoon in one hand and a smile that could warm a room faster than any radiator in Washington Heights. She kissed Sophia on both cheeks, squeezed Elena's arm, and ushered them inside. The apartment was small. 2 rooms, 1 window that faced a brick wall, a kitchen where the stove and the prayer candle competed for counter space. But it smelled like sofrito and café con leche and something Elena could never name. Something that existed only in the homes of women who had spent their entire lives making nothing feel like enough. They ate. They talked about Sophia's school. They talked about the leak in Elena's bathroom ceiling. They did not talk about the briefcase or the boarding passes or the crayon drawing that said, "Mommy, come home soon." But Abuela Rosa had survived 83 years by reading what people carried behind their eyes, and Elena's eyes that afternoon were carrying something heavy. After Sophia fell asleep on the couch with a coloring book open on her chest, Abuela Rosa poured 2 cups of coffee, set them on the table, and looked at her granddaughter without blinking. "Dime, mija. Whatever it is, say it before it eats you from inside." Elena told her everything. The phone call, the boarding pass, the drawing, the briefcase, Victoria's threats, Marcus's documents. All of it came out in one long exhale, like a dam that had held too long and finally cracked. Abuela Rosa listened without interrupting. When Elena finished, the old woman was quiet for a long time. She turned her coffee cup slowly between her palms, the way she did when she was reaching for something buried deep. "You know, I cleaned houses for 40 years in this city," Abuela Rosa said. "The last family I worked for before my knees gave out was a woman on the Upper East Side. Her name was Diane. She had a boy she was raising alone. Smart woman. Strong. She used to say something I never forgot." The old woman paused. Her eyes glistened under the kitchen light. "She told me, Rosa, the people who pour the water see things the people sitting at the table never will. And one day, one of us is going to have to speak." Elena's hands went still around her cup. "Diane? Diane Ashford, mija. I worked for Jonathan's mother for 6 years. I held that boy when he was small enough to fit in one arm." The kitchen went silent except for Sophia's breathing on the couch and the radiator clanking its old familiar rhythm. Elena stared at her grandmother. The distance between Washington Heights and Park Avenue, a distance she had measured her whole life in subway stops and service elevators and lowered eyes, collapsed into a single sentence spoken at a kitchen table over 2 cups of coffee. "Your mother, Carmen, God rest her soul?" Abuela Rosa continued, her voice dropping to almost nothing. "She wanted to tell you about Diane. She knew the connection. But she was afraid you'd feel strange working in that house, so she kept quiet. Silence was your mother's way of protecting. But silence, mija, is also how good people let bad things win." The night before the wedding, Elena stood outside Jonathan's study for 11 minutes before she knocked. She counted every one of those minutes on the hallway clock. 11 minutes of asking herself if a woman who cleans floors has the right to burn down a castle. She knocked. She told him everything. Jonathan listened without moving. When she finished, he was gripping the silver pocket watch so hard the clasp left a mark on his palm. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He asked her one question. "Will you say it again tomorrow?" In front of everyone. Now it was tomorrow. The minister had asked for objections. Jonathan had raised his own hand, and Elena was walking toward the altar on legs that felt borrowed from someone braver. 200 guests sat in silence so complete she could hear her own shoes on the carpet. Victoria stood at the altar in a white gown that cost more than Elena would earn in 5 years. Her bouquet trembled in her hands. Marcus sat in the third row, his face draining of color like someone had pulled a plug at the bottom of his neck. Elena reached the altar. She did not look at Victoria. She looked at Jonathan. He nodded once. She turned to the guests and spoke with the voice she had carried her whole life. Quiet, steady, built for rooms that never wanted to hear it. My name is Elena Vasquez. I clean Mr. Ashford's home. I have cleaned it for 4 years. In those 4 years I have learned every corner of that house. And I have learned that the woman standing at this altar is not who she says she is. Victoria's bouquet hit the floor. Her name is Victoria Myers. She has a husband named Kevin in Philadelphia and 2 children who draw pictures asking their mommy to come home. The man in the third row, Marcus Webb, introduced her to Mr. Ashford so they could drain his estate through inflated art purchases funneled into a company Marcus owns. I have seen the documents. I have seen the boarding passes. I have heard the phone calls. She paused. The ballroom was frozen. People ask me what a maid sees. A maid sees everything. I clean the rooms where people hide their truths. I pick up what falls from their pockets and their purses and their careless conversations. The people who pour the water see things that the people sitting at the table never will. Marcus stood up. 2 of Jonathan's security team blocked the aisle before he reached the second step. Victoria opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out the pocket watch. His hands were shaking. He opened the case, and a small folded paper fell out, wedged behind the mechanism. He had never noticed it. He unfolded it. His mother's handwriting. 3 lines. Mijo, the woman Marcus will bring you is not what she seems. Rosa's granddaughter will be the one who tells you the truth. Trust the ones who pour the water. Jonathan looked at Elena. His eyes broke open like a window hit by a stone. He pressed his mother's letter against his chest, and for the first time since Diane Ashford died, her son wept in front of the world. The plaza emptied in waves. First the gasps, then the whispers, then the chairs scraping against the floor as 200 guests filed out carrying the wreckage of a wedding in their mouths. Security held Marcus at the side entrance until the police arrived. He didn't fight. He sat on a gilded chair with his head in his hands, staring at the carpet like a man watching his reflection drown. Victoria never made it past the altar steps. She collapsed onto the first pew, her white gown pooling around her like spilled milk. Her father's attorney arrived within the hour. The legal machinery that rich people build to escape consequences grown to life, but the evidence was already in Jonathan's hands, and in the hands of the detective his attorney retained before the last guest left the building. In the weeks that followed, the courts moved. Victoria Myers was charged with fraud and conspiracy. Marcus Webb's accounts were frozen. Webb Capital Holdings was seized. The paintings, all 7 of them, were recovered from a storage unit in New Jersey, appraised at a fraction of what the estate had paid. Jonathan's legal team dismantled the scheme the way Elena cleaned rooms. Methodically, thoroughly, without leaving a single corner untouched. Jonathan did not return to the penthouse for 3 days after the wedding. When he finally came back, Elena was there. She had set his coffee in the usual place. She had replaced the wilted flowers in the study with fresh ones. She had folded his mother's letter and placed it beside the reading glasses on the side table, the 2 pieces of Diane Ashford now resting together for the first time. He found her in the hallway and said, "My mother knew. She knew before any of us. Abuela Rosa says the women who clean learn things the women who decorate never will," Elena replied. He didn't offer her a promotion. She didn't ask for one. What passed between them that morning was something quieter than gratitude and older than romance. It was recognition. The kind that happens when one person finally sees another after years of looking through them. A month later, Abuela Rosa visited the penthouse for the first time. She walked through the rooms slowly, touching the walls, nodding, remembering. Sophia ran down the hallway in her sneakers, counting her steps out loud. Jonathan placed the silver pocket watch on the mantel beside his mother's reading glasses and a photograph he had found in Diane's dresser. Two women standing side by side in a kitchen, laughing. Diane and Rosa, 30 years younger, arm in arm. Elena stood in the doorway watching her grandmother trace a finger across the photograph. The penthouse was full for the first time since Diane Ashford had lived in it. Not full of guests, not full of schemes, not full of expensive silence. Full of the kind of people who pour the water and, when the moment demands it, speak the truth that saves everything. If this story reminded you that the quietest voice in the room is often the most important one, share it with someone who needs to hear that today.